Welcome back to Cold Blood Files, where true crime stories aren't just told, they're dissected, piece by piece, with all the chilling darkness that hides behind human faces. If you're into deep, emotional, and thought-provoking crime stories, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here, every video brings not just facts, but haunting questions that may never have answers. Imagine this: you live in a quiet neighborhood. Everyone seems friendly. Ordinary homes, ordinary lives. But then you find out, the couple next door, the one you smiled at in passing, has been kidnapping, torturing, and murdering women. Not for money. Not for revenge. But as an expression of love. This isn't a horror movie. It's real. It happened in Perth, Australia, in 1986. David and Catherine Birnie. A name that still sends shivers down the spine of a nation. Not just because of what they did, but because of how together they did it. A love story so twisted, so broken, it transformed passion into pain, and affection into execution. So what turns a relationship into a killing spree? Were they born monsters, or did trauma, neglect, and society's blind spots forge them into something unnatural? And perhaps most haunting of all, how did one brave 17-year-old girl, Kate Moyer, manage to escape their house of horrors, and bring it all to an end? Today, we won't just retell their crimes, we'll peel back the layers of their minds, the cracks in their pasts, and the chilling silence of a community that never saw it coming. This is not just a case. It's a warning. It's a question mark over the people we think we know. So get ready. Because what you're about to hear is a descent into one of Australia's darkest, most disturbing love stories. Australia in the 1980s was a country in transition. Major cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth were booming, economically and culturally. But behind the optimism of the era, cracks were starting to show. Rising unemployment, increasing income inequality, and the quiet neglect of mental health issues created a dangerous silence for those slipping through the cracks. Crime doesn't grow in a vacuum. It festers in the gaps society chooses to ignore. David John Birnie was born in 1951 into a household where chaos was the norm. His family life was described as dysfunctional, marked by alcohol abuse, violence, and emotional neglect. While other children fell asleep in the arms of loving parents, David learned to hide in corners to avoid beatings. No one taught him how to love. Instead, he learned how to control. He dropped out of school early and began displaying deviant behavior during his teenage years. At one point, he reportedly said he just didn't fit into the world. And, terrifyingly, the world didn't seem to want to make room for him either. Some psychologists would later suggest that David showed signs of antisocial personality disorder from a young age. But back then, no one intervened. And if they had, society lacked the tools and awareness to do so effectively. Catherine Margaret Harrison, who would later take the Birnie name, was also born in 1951. Her childhood wasn't as openly chaotic as David's, but it was filled with pain of a different kind. Her mother died young. Her father remarried. And from an early age, Catherine felt like an unwanted outsider in her own home. She longed for love, for someone who made her feel seen. And when David entered her life, he became the black hole that pulled her in. Catherine met David when she was just 14. From that point on, her life was never the same. Even when they were separated, even when David's criminal record grew darker, Catherine kept finding her way back to him. This wasn't just love, it was emotional dependency in its most dangerous form. Catherine didn't simply fall for David, she became consumed by him. And when David stepped into darkness, she didn't pull him back, she followed. Looking back, people often ask, why didn't anyone stop them sooner? But the truth is, David and Catherine, like many violent offenders, were once simply broken children. Not everyone who suffers becomes a killer. But nearly every serial killer was once a neglected soul. Australia in the 1980s may have been modern on the surface, but in many ways, it was ill-equipped to care for the mentally and emotionally fragile. Broken children were left to drift, and by the time they turned into monsters, it was already too late. Most people assume serial killers are loners, isolated figures who quietly descend into madness. But the case of David and Catherine Birnie challenges that assumption in the most chilling way. Two people didn't just fall into darkness, they walked into it, together. Their reunion wasn't fate, it was a disaster waiting to happen. After years apart, Catherine had built what seemed like a normal life. She married, had children, and from the outside, appeared to be moving on. But beneath that surface of domestic stability, something darker lingered, an emotional void that only David had ever filled. Twisted or not, he was the only one who ever made her feel like she belonged. In 1985, more than a decade after they first met, Catherine made a decision that would change everything. She left her husband, her children, and her entire life to return to David. It wasn't a romantic reunion. It was the beginning of a deadly partnership. David, at this point, was still a fringe figure, jobless, petty criminal, largely ignored by society. But now he had something new, a woman who would do anything for him, even kill. No murder is truly random. What David and Catherine did was not spontaneous. It was premeditated, though not always meticulous. It began with fantasies. They'd lie together, discussing scenarios of kidnapping, rape, and murder, not in fear, not in horror, but in excitement. David sought control, power, and domination. For him, rape and murder were not just crimes, they were assertions of identity. Catherine, meanwhile, fed off that intensity. Helping him carry out these crimes wasn't just complicity, it was, in her eyes, a gesture of love. The truly terrifying part. They didn't want to stop at one. This wasn't about impulse. It was about repetition. Each act fed the next, like an addiction they couldn't satisfy. Toxic love doesn't always explode, it sometimes simmers quietly, building pressure beneath the surface. David and Catherine weren't random accomplices. They were mirrors of each other. David needed someone to validate his sickness. Catherine needed someone to make her feel worthy, even if that worth came from participating in horror. This is a terrifying reminder. A relationship built on pain and codependency can become the perfect tool for evil. And by 1986, they were ready to act. No more fantasy. No more waiting. Their first victim would soon walk into their trap. And the door to hell would open. When a serial killer strikes for the first time, it's not just a crime, it's a crossing point, a moment of no return. But for David and Catherine Birnie, that first murder felt more like a ritual initiation, a dark ceremony into a world of violence, guilt, and irreversible descent. The first victim, Mary Nielsen, a kind girl just trying to help. On October 6, 1986, 22-year-old university student Mary Nielsen was looking for a set of cheap tires. She was soft-spoken, kind, and trusting. When she met David at a small auto shop, he seemed polite, friendly even. He offered to sell her a used set of tires at a good price and said they were at his house, just a few minutes' drive away. Mary accepted the offer, not realizing that her decision to trust a stranger was about to seal her fate. David led her to 3 Morehouse Street in Willagee, the quiet suburban home he shared with Catherine. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a trap. A carefully arranged space where cruelty had a schedule. As Mary stepped into the house, Catherine emerged. Without hesitation, without mercy, she helped David restrain Mary at knife point. They tied her up, gagged her, and locked her in the bedroom. Over the following hours, David raped Mary multiple times, while Catherine watched and assisted. What's perhaps most horrifying is not just what they did, but how Catherine played an active role. She was no hostage, no bystander. She was a willing accomplice. When David was done, he strangled Mary with a nylon cord. Catherine, according to her own confession, held Mary's legs to keep her from struggling. There was no remorse. If anything, the murder invigorated them. It was no longer a fantasy. Now, they had done it. And like addicts tasting their first hit, they wanted more. Mary Nielsen wasn't careless. She was simply kind. She trusted too easily. And what makes this case so disturbing isn't just the brutality, but how ordinary the moment leading up to it seemed. How many times have you accepted help from a stranger? How many times have you believed in someone because they smiled at you? We can't live in constant fear. But this case reminds us that evil doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it smiles. David buried Mary in a shallow grave in a bushland area near Wanneroo, an area he knew from previous work. It wasn't hidden well. It wasn't meant to be. This wasn't about escaping justice. It was about power, confidence, a terrifying lack of fear. Catherine didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She went out to buy food. And just days later, the next victim was already chosen. The door to hell wasn't just open anymore, it had been blown wide apart. After their first murder, David and Catherine Birnie didn't go into hiding. They didn't show fear or remorse. In fact, what followed was far more disturbing. They felt closer, more connected, as if committing a terrible act had only strengthened their twisted bond. And once complicity becomes a habit, the next victim is never far away. A teenage girl and a fateful decision. Just days after the murder of Mary Nielsen, the couple encountered Susanna Candy, a 15-year-old high school student walking home in a quiet Perth suburb. Susanna was the daughter of an educated family, bright, well-behaved, with dreams for the future. On that day, she accepted what appeared to be a simple, harmless offer for a ride. But what she didn't know was that this offer came from a pair who were spiraling deeper into darkness, two individuals who no longer saw human life as sacred, but as something to control and consume. Unlike the first victim, Susanna wasn't immediately harmed. According to later testimony and case files, she was held in the house for several days. During this time, something shifted. David reportedly began showing signs of attachment, or at least a strange fascination, with the girl. Catherine, instead of intervening or showing empathy, experienced something else entirely: jealousy. But not the kind that leads to tears. It was a cold, possessive, and dangerous jealousy. To maintain her place beside David, Catherine made a chilling decision, one that would cement her role not just as an accomplice, but as an active, willing participant in the crime. She helped end Susanna's life, not out of rage, but as a twisted act of devotion. Susanna Candy vanished without a trace. Her family searched. The community worried. But inside the house on Morehouse Street, there was no panic. According to later court testimony, Catherine claimed she felt at peace after it happened. Not because justice was served, there was none, but because she believed she had proven herself to David. That was all that mattered. No guilt. No breakdown. Only cold affirmation of her place in the relationship. What makes this part of the story so haunting isn't just what happened to Susanna, but why it happened. Catherine wasn't forced. She wasn't threatened. She chose to participate, believing that love meant loyalty at any cost, even if that cost was someone's life. It's a terrifying reminder that love, when warped, when rooted in fear and dependency, can become a tool of destruction. Susanna wasn't just a victim of violence, she was a victim of a deeply broken relationship where control replaced compassion, and silence replaced humanity. If Mary Nielsen's murder was the beginning, and Susanna Candy's death became a twisted, blood pact that cemented David and Catherine's bond, then the third victim marked a chilling transformation. From any remaining guilt, to something far worse, a mutual thrill in violence. At this point, killing was no longer just a way to reinforce loyalty or silence witnesses. It had become a shared game, a dark form of stimulation that brought the couple closer together in ways that defied all morality. The third victim, Nolene Patterson, not a convenient target, but a psychological challenge. On November 1, 1986, David and Catherine encountered Nolene Patterson, a self-reliant woman working in the hospitality industry. Unlike the previous younger victims, Nolene was an adult, confident, independent, and not easily manipulated. And that, in David's twisted perspective, made her more exciting. She wasn't just another opportunity, she was a challenge. They approached her like they had the others, offering a ride, projecting a sense of safety. But behind the wheel, David was no longer acting alone. He was now part of a deadly partnership fueled by adrenaline and shared obsession. By this time, it was crystal clear, Catherine was no longer just along for the ride. She had become an equal partner in planning, executing, and controlling their victims. In later testimonies, even David admitted that Catherine had begun actively suggesting ideas, even showing enthusiasm for repeating the experience, because for them, each victim brought them closer in a way that no normal relationship ever had. This is a key moment in criminal psychology, when two individuals co-escalate, feeding off each other's instability, enabling one another, and removing whatever boundaries once existed. And for David and Catherine, the deeper they went, the more they needed it, like a psychological addiction. Though strong and self-sufficient, Nolene eventually suffered the same tragic fate. But what made this case particularly disturbing was David's strange attachment to her. Similar to how he reacted to Susanna, he seemed to hesitate, perhaps even develop a misguided fascination. This triggered Catherine's jealousy once again, this time, even more intensely. Nolene was mature, attractive, and clearly different from Catherine. According to some records, Catherine felt threatened by her presence and demanded David prove his loyalty once again. As always, the only way to end the threat, in Catherine's eyes, was to silence it permanently. In the end, Catherine won. Not over Nolene, but over David's emotions. And that says a lot about how far they had fallen. From the first victim to the third, we've seen a clear descent, not just in violence, but in the couple's emotional and psychological state. David wasn't dragging Catherine along. By this point, they were evolving together, into something darker, colder, and more dangerous. They weren't killing out of panic or necessity. They were killing because they wanted to. Because it made them feel alive, connected, loved. And that's perhaps the most horrifying part of this case. Love, when poisoned by obsession and fear, can turn two broken people into one lethal force. In the thick darkness that David and Catherine Birnie had created, it seemed as though there was no room left for light. But in that abyss, a 17-year-old girl, physically small but mentally unbreakable, did the unthinkable. She survived, and exposed the entire truth behind one of Australia's most chilling crime sprees. This moment would become a turning point in the case, not just because Kate Moyer lived to tell the tale, but because she forced the entire country to face a nightmare hiding in plain sight. Kate Moyer, a teenage girl, one bad decision, and a night that changed everything. On November 9, 1986, Kate Moyer was standing by the road after an argument with her parents. It was a reckless decision, driven by teenage impulsiveness, but no one could have known it would lead her straight into the hands of monsters. David and Catherine pulled up, polite faces, gentle voices. Kate, like so many before her, felt no danger at first. She got into the car unaware that she was stepping into a real-life horror, one from which no one had returned alive. The moment the door shut behind Kate inside the Birnie's house, she knew this wasn't safe. These were not good people. David and Catherine wasted no time revealing their true nature, restraining her, gagging her, intimidating her. All of this took place in a seemingly normal neighborhood, where people walked their dogs and watered their lawns. That fact alone makes this even more chilling. Kate wasn't just scared, she knew she would die if she didn't act. But instead of collapsing into fear, her survival instinct kicked in full force. What set Kate apart from the previous victims wasn't just the situation, it was how she responded. Rather than scream or panic, she observed. She watched David and Catherine closely, listening to their tone, their body language, every word exchanged. She began playing along, pretending to be compliant, even earning a small level of trust from Catherine, who, in her jealousy, needed to feel in control. The next morning, David made her write a letter to her family to reassure them. And that's when Kate noticed a small crack in the otherwise airtight nightmare, a possible way out. As David prepared to move her to a different location, Kate realized the car door wasn't fully locked. When he briefly stepped away, she flung it open and ran like her life depended on it, because it did. No shoes. No phone. No idea where she was. But she ran, with every ounce of survival instinct left in her. She reached a nearby house and knocked frantically. The homeowner was hesitant at first, seeing a disheveled girl, barefoot and frantic, but ultimately, he believed her, called the police, and the truth finally came crashing into the daylight. Kate Moyer's story is more than just an escape, it's proof that when everything is stripped away, what remains is will, intelligence, and the fierce desire to live. She wasn't stronger than David. She wasn't more manipulative than Catherine, but she was more clear-headed than both of them. And that clarity of mind is what ended the nightmare no one else could stop. Kate is not just a survivor, she is a hero. After Kate Moyer's miraculous escape, it was as if all of Australia woke from a nightmare. Her story wasn't just a near-death experience, it was the key testimony that exposed the horrifying truth behind the string of disappearances that had haunted Perth. For the first time, authorities realized they were dealing with serial killers, not isolated missing persons cases. The moment she arrived at the police station, Kate recounted everything in detail: the address, the house layout, their names, even specific conversations. What shocked detectives was how precise and composed she was despite the trauma. With that information, police quickly found the Birnie's residence at 3 Morehouse Street. At first, David and Catherine acted normal, trying to hide behind politeness, but the fear in their eyes said otherwise. Back at the station, David stayed silent for a while. But it didn't take long. Eventually, when faced with calm but firm questioning, he broke down completely. His first words were chilling. "If I confess, will Catherine get into trouble?" That single question revealed everything. He still cared for Catherine, his lover, partner in crime, the one he shared every brutal moment with. But it also told police that David was ready to confess. And he would confess everything. David described each murder with disturbing calmness. No hesitation. No remorse. He recounted how they stalked, abducted, and tortured their victims, almost like he was retelling achievements. Catherine's reaction was different. She initially denied everything. But when confronted with evidence, she crumbled quickly. Eventually, both of them signed full confessions, ending the bloodstreak chapter they thought no one would uncover. In November 1986, just weeks after their arrest, David and Catherine were brought to trial at the Supreme Court of Western Australia. In a rare move, both pleaded guilty with no defense, perhaps out of guilt, or just acceptance of the inevitable. The judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. David was transferred to Casuarina Prison, a maximum security facility. Catherine was sent to a women's prison and kept in isolation. They never saw each other again. To outsiders, their relationship may have looked like passion. In truth, it was a toxic mix of control, trauma, and shared delusion. They weren't just killers, they were two broken psyches that found each other and sank deeper into darkness. Their end didn't come from a dramatic standoff, but from isolation, shame, and obscurity. David took his own life in prison in 2005. No note. No goodbye. No one came to claim his body. Catherine lived in quiet anonymity behind bars. She applied for parole several times, each one rejected. She died in 2013 of heart failure. People often ask, did David and Catherine really love each other? Yes, in a twisted way. But that love was not redemptive, not beautiful, and certainly not innocent. It was obsessive, controlling, and built on blood. Love should never be the reason to harm others. And when it is, it's no longer love, it's destruction. The story of David and Catherine Birnie is not just about the horrors they committed, it's about how darkness can grow quietly in plain sight. It's about how a toxic bond between two broken souls can spiral into something unthinkable. And it's a cautionary tale that continues to echo through Australia's criminal history. Now that the story is told, we must ask, what did we learn? And how can we prevent this from ever happening again? Not just killers, but a mirror to society's blind spots. The Birnies weren't hiding in the shadows. They lived in a normal neighborhood. They drove a regular car. They looked like anyone else. That's what makes them terrifying. We often expect evil to wear a monstrous face. But the truth is, evil often hides behind charm, familiarity, and love. Neighbors thought they were just a strange couple. No one imagined that inside their house was a torture chamber. This raises an unsettling question. How many people live next door to evil without knowing it? The warning signs we ignored. Catherine Birnie didn't start off as a killer. She was once a young girl with dreams, until she met David, the man who pulled her into a world of control, obsession, and cruelty. He isolated her, controlled her choices, erased her identity. Over time, her sense of right and wrong faded, replaced by total loyalty to David, no matter what the cost. This is what happens in many abusive relationships. It doesn't always end in murder, but the pattern is the same. One person controls. The other person loses themselves. Together, they become dangerous, even to others. How this changed Australia forever. After the Birnie case, police procedures across Western Australia were reformed. Missing person cases were no longer dismissed quickly. Information sharing between departments improved. Victim support services expanded, especially for women and teens. Kate Moyer, the only survivor, became a strong advocate for victims' rights. She used her voice, once silenced in terror, to help others speak out. Her courage helped reshape how Australia viewed survivor resilience. The Birnies didn't just leave behind trauma, they left behind a reason for change. Why we must talk about cases like this? It's tempting to say, this is too dark. Why bring it up? But avoiding these stories won't protect anyone. In fact, silence is what predators count on. By understanding the warning signs, we protect our friends, our families, and ourselves. By honoring victims' stories, we make sure they are not forgotten. And by learning from the past, we build a future that's less likely to repeat it. There's a haunting truth at the heart of this story. It wasn't just cruelty that killed those girls, it was a twisted kind of love. A love that excused pain. A love that fed delusion. A love that asked for silence when it should have screamed for help. True love doesn't isolate you. True love doesn't erase your empathy. And real love never turns you into a weapon. The Birnies serve as a warning. When love loses its humanity, it becomes a monster. Let's not end this story with the names of the killers. Let's end it by remembering the women whose lives were stolen. Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, Nolene Patterson, Denise Brown, and the brave survivor, Kate Moyer. They weren't just victims. They were daughters, sisters, students, friends. Their voices were stolen, but we can make sure they're never forgotten. The story of David and Catherine Birnie isn't just another crime case. It's a powerful reminder that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face, and that love, when twisted, can become deadly. If you've stayed with us until this point, thank you, truly, for taking the time to hear a story that is hard to listen to, but important to remember. By honoring the victims, we help ensure that their voices aren't forgotten, and hopefully, we move closer to preventing future tragedies. If this story spoke to you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you want more deep, reflective true crime content, real cases, real lessons, and stories that demand to be told. Your support means the world. It helps us continue shedding light on the stories that matter, not to sensationalize them, but to remember, warn, and awaken. See you in the next video. Until then, take care, and keep an eye out for those around you.